Good morning. We at UNEP are pleased to present brief remarks at this event. The circumstances which have led to us utilizing remote communication are actually quite relevant to this day's theme. Our solutions are in nature. And indeed, the solutions to future COVID-type diseases are in nature. UNEP serves as host to the Secretariat for the Convention on Biological Diversity, or the CBD. And according to the CBD, as the global community is called to re-examine its relationship to the natural world, one thing is certain. Despite all our technological advances, we are completely dependent on healthy and vibrant ecosystems for our health, water, food, and medicines, just to name it. As noted in the UN framework for the immediate socioeconomic response to COVID-19 released last month, the current pandemic is a reminder of the intimate relationship between humans, animals, and the environment. UNEP's COVID-19 response recognizes the need for heightened awareness that deteriorating ecosystems increase zoonotic risks. As far back as 2016, our Frontiers report highlighted that 60% of all known infectious diseases in humans and 75% of all emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic. COVID-19 is just one of many diseases now known to have crossed between animals and humans. But we also know that where native biodiversity is high, the infection rate for zoonotic diseases is lower. In order to better understand the science of disturbance and risk, UNEP is mapping the links between deteriorating ecosystem health, habitat and biodiversity loss, and overexploitation of species. Such a mapping will give a clearer understanding of zoonotic transmission pathways and enable us to identify ways to interrupt these pathways. Our work streams have been adjusted to the realities of the COVID-19 threats and are now focused on improved science and policy options to respond to these threats, investing in nature for improved human health, and raising awareness of the linkages between nature, human health, and sustainable living. We recognize that economic and social impacts are currently the priorities in Jamaica and globally. Our key message is that as we move into the recovery phase, we should be seeking to build back better and greener. It is critical that recovery efforts be green, resilient, inclusive, and sustainable. Stimulus packages must offer the opportunity to flip the switch green, for example, through investments in green, nature-based infrastructure. Recovery can be transformational and green, guided by sustainable approaches. We at UNEP wish all a happy International Day of Biodiversity. Through COVID-19, the planet has delivered its strongest warning yet that we must change. Our solutions are indeed in nature. Thank you.
Thank you for those notes, Vincent. And I've seen people are continuing to join the webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. So this webinar is titled Biodiversity, We Are All Interconnected, and is among the leading activities to the upcoming World Environment Day on June 5th under the theme Time for Nature. And Colombia will host this World Environment Day commemoration, which is interesting because it's the first time it's going to be done through virtual means. And the message behind the World Environment Day this year is it's time to wake up. It's time to take notice, raise our voices. It's time to build back better for people and planet. And of course, this message takes into consideration the outcomes of the COVID-19 pandemic that has affected all of us in different ways. Of course, we are hearing some of the good outcomes with respect to nature, but we're hearing some of the adverse impacts. For example, increased incidence of poaching, illegal deforestation, where park management has had to scale back because of loss of operating revenue. It's also important to flag the upcoming World Oceans Day on June 8th that has significance for Caribbean countries, which we have large marine areas. And this is a call for world leaders to continue to commit to protect our marine space, protect 30% of it by 2030 in what is called a 30 by 30 call to build a network of highly protected areas that we can ensure a healthy ocean. And all of this is coming again on the heels of the International Day for Biological Diversity that took place on the 22nd under the slogan, "Our solutions are in nature," which Vincent highlighted. And in fact, nature-based solutions hold significant potential to address our many social and economic challenges. So joining us today in this webinar to give remarks and presentations is Eliana Lopez, who is the Program Officer of the Specially Protected Areas and Wildlife Protocol, the SPOR Protocol, of the Cartagena Convention Secretariat, and Sue Spencer, who's a communications specialist for the Jeff IW Eco Project. Both are based in Jamaica. Again, I'll be a moderator for the webinar, and I'll also be delivering a presentation. Between the presentations, we'll feature 2 more short videos that will showcase the role of nature and the need to safeguard in the context, particularly of the COVID-19 pandemic. You can ask your questions and leave comments in the chat, and we'll try to round those up and address them in the question and answer segment that will follow Donna's presentation. Please say to whom you're directing your comments and questions to in terms of the speakers, so you can help us out. So next, we'll just screen another short video on biodiversity and health. Again, I hand over to Sean to roll the video.
Zoonotic diseases are diseases which are shared between animals and people. It's very likely that COVID-19 came from animals. We haven't really seen anything like this in our lifetime, which has affected nearly everywhere, every country in the world. But if you then remove some of those hosts and you only create a monoculture of animals, then they are likely to be the transmitters of the disease.
Thank you, Sean. So next up in the lineup is myself. I'm going to, let's see, share my screen here. Okay. Give me 1 second, please. Okay. Can you someone confirm that you're seeing my screen, please?
Yes, it's fine.
Excellent. Okay, great. Okay, so my presentation here is the State of Caribbean Biodiversity, Challenges, Opportunities, and Link to Human Well-Being. Start by asking, what is biodiversity and why it's important? Well, of course, as I think most of you who joined the call know, it's the variability of living things that make up the Earth and encompasses the 8 million or so species that co-inhabit with us. Biodiversity fulfills many important essential services and benefits, from food production, timber, fiber production, pollination services, pest and disease management, water purification, air filtration, erosion prevention, protection from natural disasters, carbon sequestration and storage, recreation and tourism, and spiritual values. Biodiversity contributes directly to human well-being and development priorities, with some estimated 44 trillion in economic value generation, representing more than half of global GDP. Moderately or highly dependent on nature. So we are highly dependent on nature for its services. Some startling facts over the rate we're losing biodiversity. Some 1 million plant and animal species face extinction today. And the loss rate at which we face extinction is 1,000 times faster than the natural rate. So it's quite startling. According to the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, or IPBES, the average abundance of native species in most major land-based habitats has fallen by at least 20%, mostly since 1900. More than 40% of amphibian species, 33% of reef-forming corals, more than 1/3 of all marine mammals are threatened. Over 600 vertebrate species have been driven to extinction since the 16th century. More than 9% of all domesticated breeds of mammals used for food and agriculture had become extinct by 2016. Another 1,000 more breeds remain threatened. So why is it a concern? Well, of course, losing biodiversity means diminished ability to provide services for our population, less ability to filter water, support livelihoods, regulate services, reduce hazards. In some cases, species extinction can lead to these extinction cascades, where one species loss impacts another and so on. Biodiversity loss means locking out of potential options in the future, for example, access to new drugs. 4 billion people across the planet are reliant on natural medicines, and 70% of cancer drugs are either derived from natural products or inspired by nature. So what's the status in the Caribbean? Let me just give you a short snapshot. Over time, and I think we all agree with this, we've cleared lowlands for agriculture, moving into the interior of these islands. We've removed mangroves, we've backfilled wetlands to build settlements. Destroyed habitats, undertook extensive land use changes. Hunting, a huge issue in the past particularly, maybe still now. Introduction of invasive species, that is a huge problem right now. And we continue to live with pollution of our environments. I just want to take a little time to focus on some of the invasives that have been particularly destructive. The Indian mongoose that was introduced during the times of colonial days in some islands to control snakes. In more recent times, we also have had the black and Norway rats that's been introduced across the islands. Green/vervet monkeys in Barbados and St. Kitts, feral goats, and in more recent times, we've seen things like the giant African snail, the Pacific lionfish, the Cuban tree frog that have been invading habitats and compromising species. Not only animals, but plants. The African tulip tree, many people don't know that's actually an invasive species. The grass and the fire hazard it poses. The pink mealybug, the hibiscus pink mealybug. The black cicatoga that has been plaguing the banana industry in many islands. The kudzu vine you find growing extensively over forest ecosystems. This screen shows what we've lost and lost forever. You see, for example, the Cuban macaw, the Guadeloupe Amazon, the Martinique Amazon, Semper's warbler of St. Lucia, the Grand Cayman thrush, Jamaican parroquet, Jamaican petrel. These birds have disappeared substantially between or before the 1900s rolled around, mainly due to habitat and hunting, in some cases for food. When Martinique, Guadeloupe, they were hunting those birds for food. Some of the reptiles, for example, the Barbados racer. Well, the picture actually shows a racer snake from St. Lucia, which is a very close relative. The Guadeloupe amoeba, and you see the picture shows a Puerto Rican one, which is closely related. The Jamaican giant gallywasp, and you see a specimen from Haiti on the side to illustrate. And then the Martinique muskrat, which is gone forever. What else have we lost? We really don't know. Fossil records might tell. But the good news is that we still have many species. The Caribbean still remains a global hotspot where we harbor 11,000 plant species, of which 72% are endemic. All our amphibians are endemic. Most of our reptiles are endemic. Of the 564 birds, 26% are endemic. 74% of our mammal species, mostly bats, are endemic. Caribbean species are endemic within this hotspot, constitute 2.6% of the world's 30,000 plant species and 3.5% of the world's 27,000 vertebrate species. The marine environment is diverse as well. The Caribbean region represents the greatest concentration of marine biodiversity in the Atlantic Basin. You can see some of the figures here. I won't go into too much. My colleague Ileana may speak to this a bit. But the Caribbean harbors over 10,000 square kilometers of reef, 22,000 square kilometers of mangrove, as much as 33,000 square kilometers of seagrass. It's highly diverse. We do harbor some rare animals, rare marine species and endemics. The Caribbean lobster, the Bahamas saw shark, the West Indian manatee, for example, the endangered Kemp Ridley sea turtle. Biodiversity is of economic value, tremendous economic value. And the figures, there have been many studies over years which they've looked at, particularly targeted and focused studies in some countries, but I tried to find a global or regional estimate overall. And what I came up with, for example, is a survey study in 2012 that put the value of reefs somewhere in the region of 1.85 billion in annual net benefits. See how it breaks down in terms of benefits in the fisheries sector. benefits to coastal protection, tourism and recreation, and biodiversity value. At a terrestrial ecosystem level, I've yet to come across a study that sort of amalgamates across the region, but if anybody is listening in, can share, we'll be more than happy. The Caribbean is faced, of course, with many unique challenges. The fact that we're very small islands means our resource base is in very close proximity to people, our activities, so the smallness of the landscapes. And as we know, climate change is acting like an accelerant to degradation, whatever we do to the environment, and triggering rapid changes in our ecosystems, both terrestrial and marine. But then we have limited financial resources to address many of the challenges sustainably in the long run. We have limited organizational and human resource capacity because of the small human resource base. The regulatory environment, it has improved, but we still need more work. And of course, we continue to face the cultural and social norms, perceptions, and attitudes from citizenry right to policymakers, things we need to continue to work on. But there has been some work, of course, with the CARICOM. They issued a recent State of Biodiversity in the Caribbean report under the MEA's project. And you can see here, I won't go into it in any detail, of course, but you can see most of the countries are signatory to these major conventions that protect biodiversity. And the protected area management system network is growing. So many countries are now investing in protected area management and there's protected area management system. So this is good news. So I just want to tell you a little bit about some of the work that we're involved in, some of the work that I'm directly responsible for overseeing is a snapshot of some of the GEF-funded biodiversity projects in the Caribbean region. One of those recently concluded is implementing national biosafety frameworks in the Caribbean sub-region. And in partnership with the University of the West Indies, countries have been supported to establish national legal frameworks for biosafety and biotechnology, enhance and upgrade institutional capacities, strengthen the biosafety information systems across the region, and enhance regional processes for biosafety. And we've been, of course, joined by the Caribbean Agricultural Health and Food Safety Agency, CAFSA, which remain as the institutional node in the region. We are actively working with CABI on another project on invasive alien species, where the project is seeking to enhance management frameworks for IAS management in the countries. It's going to pilot some initiatives in Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, St. Kitts and Nevis in controlling select invasive species and enhance the regional enabling environment for cooperation on biosafety, biosecurity and invasive alien species. We've also worked with Caribbean countries, with IUCN, on advancing the Nagoya Protocol in the Caribbean region, basically ensuring equitable access and sharing of biological resources, and to assist in the uptake of the Nagoya Protocol. And that project has resulted in national policy formulation and development of regional guidelines, legislative drafts and regulations that could be brought into national legislation and regulation, enhanced information exchange, build awareness, build the APS mechanism, and enhance regional coordination. And we're working also with the OECS in some of this work. Currently, the Bahamas has a national ABS project, and we're anxious to share some of the results that are coming out of that project. Protected areas management, we do have some regional cooperation. We're working with the International Conservation Caucus Foundation to introduce this, what they call Conservation Caucus model, bringing on board legislators and parliamentarians more into the management of protected areas, something that we've been trying to do for a long time. So we're going to try to work with some live examples with, for example, the Codrington Lagoon National Park in Barbuda, the Cabris National Park in Dominica, the Grand Anse Marine Protected Area in Grenada, and the Ianola Protected Area in St. Lucia. And we do have some national projects on protected areas management, biodiversity. So we have Antigua and Barbuda. There's the Sustainable Pathways Protected Areas and Renewable Energy Project, which is seeking to draw in energy sales for renewable energy investments in protected area management funding, which is quite interesting. We also have another project, the Path to 2020 there, which is looking at protection of biodiversity through the enhanced of the newly passed Environmental Protection Act. In the Bahamas, we have the Challenge of 2020 project, again, focusing on protected areas management, mostly marine protected areas management, and demonstrate mitigation options. And in St. Lucia, the Ianola project, where on the Northeast Coast, seeking to enhance management effectiveness and sustainable use and generating multiple benefits in an area that has many indigenous and unique biodiversity. So the last couple of slides, I'll just focus a little bit on the outlook on biodiversity, some of the messaging from UNEP in the wake of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, and talk a bit about the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. What has emerged from the pandemic? Of course, we're seeing that we need to continue the control of illegal wildlife trade, but doing this while supporting local economies that are dependent on wildlife trade, in fact. And at the same time, safeguarding wildlife habitats. The important other thing is we need to ensure we're curbing habitat degradation, particularly where populations are being exposed to new zoonosis by moving into these wild areas. Strengthen regulation and sanitary standards in both wild and domestic animals, in meat markets, etc. And that's linked to some of the biosecurity measures. Some of the stuff that's taking place under the Biosafety project will have some overlap of that. In fact, UNEP's Frontiers report, and Vincent mentioned it, reported 60% of all known infectious diseases in humans and 75% of all emerging infections are zoonotic. There's also a need to continue to research and build the evidence based on the risk profile for species, which ones present more risk, etc. And importantly, I think for Caribbean economies to diversify, to enhance resilience, create those green jobs, okay? Set up multiple value chains rather than being dependent on one single income. And we've seen that, for example, in protected areas that are solely reliant on tourism receipts. What about building value chains with local economies and local populations and so on? That also serves to enhance resilience to future pandemics and also enhance resilience as we're in the Caribbean to natural disasters and other phenomena. So you'll note in the presentation here, which I think would be available through the UNEP Jamaica office, those links are provided at the bottom of the slides where you can learn more. And you can access UNEP's website and the regional office for UNEP's website, and you'll get access to all this information. So finally, on the Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, almost forgot, this is a UN committed goal across all countries to halt and reverse degradation. And it's seeking to restore 350 million hectares of degraded landscapes by 2030, with an anticipated benefit of US 9 trillion in ecosystem services value. This initiative is being led by UNEP and FAO and multiple partners, the Global Life Landscapes Forum and others, IUCN. So you'll learn more about that. I think we'll be reaching out to countries and stakeholders in coming weeks on this. And with that, I'd like to say thank you for listening. And as I transition out, we are to take in another short video before our next presenter. So with that, I'll hand the control back to Sean. Okay, thank you, Sean. And now we get into our next segment and introduce to you from UNEP, Ileana Lopez, who will speak to us. I'm just getting her little bio. She's a program officer with responsibility for the Specially Protected Areas and Wildlife Spore Protocol subprogram at UNEP Regional Seas for the Caribbean Cartagena Convention based in Jamaica. And she's responsible for the overall coordination, implementation, and further development of the Spore Protocol and its regional program on biodiversity management. Ileana holds a degree in biology and a master's degree in marine sciences, and she will be diving into the current state of mangroves, seagrass beds, and coral reefs in the Caribbean, the wider Caribbean region. So with that, I will hand over to Ileana.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. We can hear you.
Thank you so much. Okay, good day, everybody. And we are going to start with a short this is a small reflection for all the people, the workers and the people that are our new soldiers, the people that is outside helping all the people in need during this COVID situation. And I wish to start with this slide from the National Park in Dominican Republic. And this park is a park where we have been working with the ecosystem-based management. And it's a beautiful slide. That's why I didn't want to put the title over there. And this, thanks to Jose Alejandro Alvarez, as you see, many people collaborate with these presentations. He gladly shared this with us. This is his job. And we are starting with this landscape, submarine landscape. That's what I am saying, diving. We can see different kinds of corals and fishes. And this is the richness of the biodiversity. So we are going to dive into the current state of mangrove, seagrass beds, and coral reefs. And I appreciate because the Office of the Caribbean Sub-Regional Office has invited us, the Secretariat, to participate. So on behalf of the Secretariat, I wish to welcome you, all partners, contracting parties, partners, experts, scientists, and also all the colleagues that have been supporting the preparation of this, like Sean, Dion, and Georgina. So we are going to take a ride about facts that you all experts know. I have seen many of you that I already know from the biodiversity in the Caribbean, facts, coral restoration exercises that are already undergoing on the region, mangrove restoration, seagrasses, and the Cartagena Convention. So what the first question that we should ask when we come to all these meetings is, instead of repeating ourselves, what they are going to say is, what are the challenges has been described by my colleague, Christopher. But where we are and what are we doing to change things? And I know that many of you presented at this meeting, you are doing more than many people can even witness. So what needs to be done? So we have already said that the Caribbean Sea, even when it just represents 1% of the global ocean, it accounts for 107 billions, which is 14 to 27% of the global ocean economy. So these are potential, big reasons to support the work and the livelihoods of people in this region. It also hosts the highest marine species richness in the Atlantic Ocean and represents 2 of the 34 identified biodiversity hotspots. That's why this is considered the high biodiversity heart of the Western Atlantic. So as you can see, the importance of corals that we know already is for species, for fishes, crabs, from a spiritual connection, for tourism, and for the economy. So this is one of the most diverse ecosystems on the planet, and they protect coastlines from damaging effects of wave action, from different catastrophic events, hurricanes, and also provide habitats and life for many organisms. So I wish to keep saying who have provided these photographs just as a matter of appreciating and respecting our colleagues. Marie Pistor, for example, I was not even able to include all the pictures that she from the Marine Park Reserve in San Eustatius is sharing. And these are all the partners that work with us. So many of you, I cannot say your names, but many of you, I saw that you are attending this meeting. So for example, GCRMN, part of ICRI, CARES, PORAC, Reef Check, Estinapa, and healthy reefs. This is the distribution of the coral reefs in the wider Caribbean. And we are so lucky to witness the second coral barrier reef in the world in Mesoamerica, shared by Honduras in a very small, tiny portion, to be honest, in Guatemala, and widely in Belize and Mexico. So the coral reef's economic value fluctuates between 1.1 billion in Florida, which is a big space of land, to 24 million in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for example. So, and we already mentioned, and my colleague Chris already mentioned the protection against flooding, hurricanes, and so I am not going to entertain you with numbers that we really quickly forget. So Anna, you are there attending this presentation, and I appreciate to Anna Giro. She's a very passionate scuba diver and professional that she's been working with coral reefs over the years. And she gladly shared this slide from Guatemala. I was so surprised that this is in Guatemala. As we all know, the coral reefs protect against climate change, overfishing, and so on. And they have been threats of all these issues. For example, the ocean acidification. Now it's more difficult for coral reefs to build the calcareous structures. They are subject to overfishing, inappropriate land use, invasive species. And we are going to talk a little bit very quickly about some of the diseases that are affecting in the region and the direct physical impacts. So this is once again a picture from Marie Pisto. And then I saw also that Nicole Brown is attending this meeting. She's from Canary and Estupendous, an excellent expert in the region. And she helped us to put together with other colleagues from Canary a report. That is the State of the Habitats report. And at this report, the coral reefs rated to fair to poor through the region, even though they support key economic sectors. And they provide 8.3 million per year in the region. So then in response to these threats in the region, we are a privileged region with all these type of experts and people that I have been mentioning and others that I have not mentioned yet. But for example, the colleagues, this is in Dominican Republic, the Punta Cana group, they are working with coral restoration, with microfragmentation. As you are aware, there are different techniques for coral restoration, like direct transplantation, coral gardening, microfragmentation, and so on, larval enhancement. And we, since many years, I know people in Mexico that when I heard that this was ongoing, I was thinking, what are they doing? I am telling you, like 20 years ago. So when the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration 2021-2030 comes, we are already in advance. We already have some cases to share, some lessons learned. And these are some examples of countries and territories that are implementing coral restoration projects in the Caribbean region. Florida, Barbados, Belize, Bonaire, and so on. I am very impressed, and I wish to share something that has been done in Bonaire with the Reef Renewal Foundation Bonaire. These are pictures from them. They shared it with me. These are our partners. These are the people that we work with at the Cartagena Convention. And they have 30 years of protected marine park. And this is actively managed by a group that is called Estinapa Bonaire. And this is also the results of the restoration. So they work with a group of successful and very passionate people, volunteers, and local dive shops. So we can do it. So this is a part of the restoration project that is in Bonaire, that you can see how professional it is and well managed. And these are some of the results. And the credit of this picture goes to David Fishman. And this is, you see how healthy look, even though it's mono-specific. I will call it probably perhaps no restoration, but plantation of some sort. But still, there is like this likelihood that against events of some stress, we can still do something to protect and recover the environment. So another example that was shared with me from Patricia Kramer is the Fragments of Hope. It's a community organization in Plasencia, Belize, that focuses on restoration of coral reefs, and this is in Laughenberg. I don't know if you have ever been there, but they were experiencing several challenges and threats, And the community came together and they created this organization that is proving very successful. So these are another of the examples, but then we have a question. What is happening with the terms of diseases that we mentioned before? So now we are being affected from since 2014, I'm speaking now in Spanish, 2014, the stony coral tissue loss disease, and this is spreading out through the region. So this is the work also the Roxana Rodriguez and some people in Mexico. This is in Cancun, and they have been trying with AGRA, the Atlantic and Gulf Rapid Assessment Program. They are trying to follow up and provide some information. I know that there are some other partners in the region also working, like MPA Connect and GCFI. So this is the distribution of the diseases, this disease, the stony coral tissue loss disease. And you can see that this is spreading, and this is really something that we should be highly concerned, because this is destroying big amounts of corals in the region. So now, after breathing a little bit, I'm going to go to something, one ecosystem that is very well known, above all, by my colleagues, Claudia Teutli and Dr. Herrera, both of them doctors of Investav and UNAM. And these, for those students that are with those people that are coming for first time, these are habitat for commercial important fish species nesting. I have the luck for my one of my thesis that I was working with shrimps, and I was surprised how larvae from the high ocean come to spend part of the life cycle here, and then you can make them to grow, and how they use the leaves like the crabs, and how this cycle of nutrients is happening is something so passionate that this is worth to know. So, but sadly, the mangroves status and trends are not also too optimistic, with the exception of some countries, perhaps like Cuba and Puerto Rico, but other countries have demonstrated that there's a 33% decrease in the region. So I wish that I can turn my microphone to Jorge Herrera and Claudia, because they were able to explain to me how they have been working for more than 20 years in restoration of mangroves, and all the effort that they have put together to understand the different variables that are important to really have a restoration, not really plantation, because there is differentiation in terms of if you just plant Rhizophora mangle, or if you change the hydrology and then let nature to resolve the group of species. You see, this was the before, like when the people is skinny before, and this is the after. So this is Investav Mexico team, and we are going to be working over the next, I will say, over the next month with Claudia and Jorge to produce the first regional guidelines. So for the restoration, and we are going to make this in collaboration under the CLME project and with the collaboration of the Ocean Foundation too. So these are other examples of countries that are also doing restoration projects in terms of mangroves, and Bonaire, Suriname. These are locally managed mangrove restoration projects. So there are different, like in Trinidad and Tobago, and so on, and in Panama. I also was able to see some of this in Dominican Republic. So going quickly to the seagrass, you already know the number of species, their vulnerability, and also the important role that seagrass communities play for marine fauna, such as fish, like the quincun and the sea urchins, manatees, and so on. Even when you see this like an ecosystem that doesn't look like more like grass, this is so important. And this is Dr. Alejandro Arribellaga too, where he was doing his research thesis in Guatemala. So you know that a single acre of seagrass may support as many as 40,000 fish and 50 million small invertebrates like crabs. And all of these become part of the chain of ecological chain and the food chain. So you can support oysters and mussels, and 50% of the world's fisheries come from these ecosystems. So we need to have a wide respect for this ecosystem. So taking into account the work done in collaboration with our colleagues from Canary, and that has been reviewed by our contracting parties and experts, we are going to finalize this report, but some of the main highlights on the gaps in knowledge of coral reefs, mangroves, and seagrass beds tell us that we need to still keep working on GIS mapping of benthic habitats. And there is not much information on local and traditional knowledge on biodiversity, status of key species, for example. So when I was doing some research very, very long ago, I was thinking, oh man, we do all this research and what is this is going to be? Now this is being highlighted that we really need all this information for decision and policy making and for interlinking the work of science with the dimensions of economic sectors. So the gaps in knowledge on coral reefs in terms of the impacts of threats on the three ecosystems is, even if you saw some information, and I have been mentioned all these experts and scientists and people working, there is lack of basic comparable data. And sometimes many researchers or groups or NGOs are into, no, my methodology is better than yours, your assessment is not better, yours is not complete. So perhaps we should come out together and have some basic standard protocols, because we can compare across the region. And just try to bring down a little bit our egos and work together, so we can really make changes on in coral reefs and all these species. More research is needed. So the researchers are very, very important to correlate potential, for example, the mercury sources that are polluting fishes, and more lately, we are also discussing with sargassum. So in terms of management actions, the gaps in knowledge tell us that the lack of adequate coral data hinders definition the key biodiversity areas. We need more information to determine the variability and value of services provided, for example, by seagrasses, and so many others. So we will invite you to read this report that is going to be available pretty soon. We are in the final details of formatting and furtherly translating and incorporating last minor details. But letting you know that this is like a report that I wish that it just have more information, even though there is a lot that is comparable across the region, because there are some countries that have made some studies in particular protected areas or as part of some research studies. So I make a call to countries to support these efforts, because are very important for us to be able to manage the resources. As well as part of this assessment, where we identified the gaps, we came up about with producing a regional strategy and action plan that was made taking into account all the international agreements from the CBDs, the CMS, the SDGs, and so on, the climate change. So we address all this in a jointly manner, so the countries don't feel that they are being overwhelmed for needing to report to several donors. But at the same time, we have identified those that are very important for the Cartagena Convention Secretariat in terms of its mandate. From pollution, biodiversity, and so on. So the Cartagena Convention, I am not going to entertain you more. I'm going to start kind of finish the conversation, but you already know that this is a legal instrument in the wider Caribbean region for integrated management and for the cooperation, protection, and development in the Caribbean. And this is supported by 3 protocols that you are very, very acquainted with: the pollutions, especially protected areas and wildlife, and the land source basis of marine pollution. And under the SPOSU program, we work, our mandate also working with marine protected areas, species, flora and fauna. And for that, we wish to mention and keep saying that this is the only regional biodiversity legal agreement for the advancement of the conservation and protection. So you may ask, what is this legal and what it has to do with me? It's because your countries decide what needs to be done in the region, and they allocate resources, and they are the ones that own the agenda. We just facilitate, we do whatever you tell us. So this is the realm of marine protected areas in the region, 35 protected areas that we are working, and we are going to start working to enhance the management effectiveness and the creation of networks, ecological networks over the next years with the collaboration in the European Union. And in terms of corals, I have been talking many times before, so these are our basic partners. And it's because, as you are aware, at the protocol, we have 3 annexes, 1 to 3. One is for strictly protected areas, flora and fauna, that deals about threatened or endangered species. And then there is another annex that deals with exploited and regulated species. And for example, let me give you an example. With AIDA, we have been working now, there is a working group with our colleagues from SPORAC that they are in Guadeloupe, supported by the government of France, that the experts come and say, this is a species that needs to be protected because the role in the ecosystem with the corals and so on. So then the countries propose this species, then plans come in the near future and perhaps, hopefully, some resources for their management. The same is for marine mammals. We have a regional marine mammal action plan that currently is being revamped. And these are all the colleagues, institutions that help us to work with marine mammals. As a matter of fact, we are finalizing with support of Ms. Georgina Singh and other colleagues and from Karima, Sporraca, and many experts, this campaign this week. We work with invasive species. Sargassum, we spoke about this yesterday, yesterday. And I would like to finalize saying that although progress is being made to address threats and conserve critical coastal and marine ecosystems, the progress has not been enough to reverse the trend in continued degradation and loss of critical coastal ecosystems. And at this morning says one of my previous bosses from ecosystem divisions in the past, now she's in FAO, Mete, she says, no healthy ecosystems, no healthy society. And that's true, and this accurate. So what we ask for is political will, governments engagement, NGOs, experts, and scientific community. We all, donors and private sector, youth, to all come together because together we are more. And we need to solve these issues to provide wealth, livelihoods, and a good life and spirituality to our world. Thank you so much. I wish to finalize here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that expansive presentation, Ileana. And we have, to follow this, another short video. In the meantime, I've been just scanning the chat dialogue on the right side of the screen. So you can continue to put your questions and so on in the chat. We'll monitor and address those later. Thanks. Okay, thanks. So next up in our line of speakers, we have Donna Sue Spencer, who is the communications specialist with the Jeff IW Eco project. She'll say what the IW Eco stands for, since July 2018. And her role is to enhance developments of communication strategies with the project, channeling the results of research to users, stakeholder management, design, implementation, and dissemination of information products, public and community education, media and public relations. Donna holds a BA in Environmental Sciences and Sociology and a Master of Science in Environmental Science. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to Donna. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just waiting for Sean to bring it up. Okay. Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
Yes, great. Okay. Well, this project, the Jeff-funded IWECO project, a long name, Integrating Water, Land and Ecosystems Management in Caribbean Small Island Developing States. Okay. I'll give you a very quick overview, and basically I will introduce the work in a few different countries before focusing on the biodiversity work in one particular country, Trinidad and Tobago. The Integrating Water, Land and Ecosystems Management in Caribbean Small Island Developing States project is a 5-year multifocal project. So it includes several different areas of focus, biodiversity being one of them. And there are 10 participating countries in all. 8 of those countries have national projects, which would be areas which were selected or agreed upon after consultation within the countries, which would be good for demonstrating particular interventions in certain areas. And then in addition to that, we have 2 countries with regional contributions. The national projects are in Antigua and Barbuda, Cuba, the DR, Jamaica, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Trinidad and Tobago. The overall project objective is to contribute to the preservation of Caribbean ecosystems that are of global significance and the sustainability of livelihoods through the application of existing proven technologies and approaches that are appropriate for small island developing states through improved fresh and coastal water resources management, sustainable land management, and sustainable forest management that also seek to enhance resilience of socio-ecological systems to the impacts of climate change. So you can see that it's fairly expansive and ambitious. I'm really going to focus on the interventions in one component, which is component 1, which aims to develop and foster implementation of targeted, innovative climate change resilient approaches. And this is in local areas within the countries. So we look first at Cuba, where the work is centered on 4 watersheds. Cuba has a very high species richness in these particular target areas. The target areas are outlined here, the Rio Guanabo watershed. Well, you can see all of them there. And basically, there have so far been relatively few scientific studies, so that the project is focusing upon environmental baselines, which are being conducted during these early stages of project implementation. And the project by now is quite well underway. Reforestation is a key activity in Cuba. So you can see in the map the various watersheds, and you can see there that, well, I'm going to go through fairly quickly the different countries, but you can see that some of the monitoring work has begun. The second country would be St. Lucia, where we have the mitigation of poor biophysical conditions in the upper reaches of the Soufriere watershed, which is the site. Here we have an area which includes the town of Soufriere and the surrounding communities, and it's an economically quite vulnerable area in St. Lucia. It is very susceptible to land degradation due to steep slopes, and because of the soil tides and the heavy rainfall. In addition, it suffered greatly during the Hurricane Thomas in 2010, when there were many landslides and loss of life, a lot of destruction in the watershed. Land degradation mitigation, over 90 hectares, aims to restore agricultural land productivity and to reduce loss of lives, risk of loss of life, etc. So a lot of the interventions here are on alternative farming and sustainable forest management, including notably a plan to develop an agritourism park. So there you can see on the land slides, the agritourism park here is being partly supported by the community and also in collaboration with the UNDP Small Grants Program. In St. Vincent, we have the Georgetown watershed, which is a national biodiversity hotspot. And one of the aims here is to protect the endemic St. Vincent parrot. So this watershed, which is in northeast St. Vincent, the interventions focus on reforestation and conservation forestry interventions. And the thinning of the blue mahu and mahogany forest plantations is one of the measures to improve stability of the existing forest plantation. So there is, in addition, enriched planting of naturalized species and the development of the Jennings birdwatching trail and conduct of a census of the St. Vincent parrot, which is vulnerable due to habitat loss. So in this slide, you can actually see one of Christopher Cox's paintings here of the St. Vincent parrot. We borrowed that, Chris. Hope you don't mind. And,
no problem.
and you can see some shots also of the watershed, and you can see the extent to which the land is degraded in some areas. Next up, we have Jamaica, where the area of focus is the Negril Great Morass, and this includes the Negril Royal Palm Reserve. So this is one of the largest natural coastline ecosystems in the Caribbean region and has a high degrees of species endemism. The part of the project aims to strengthen the management of the overall Negril Environmental Protection Area, which was designated for special attention by the National Natural Resources Conservation Authority Act in 1997. And here we also have several species that are threatened, but we also have the endangered. It includes the endangered Caribbean endemic West Indian whistling duck. And interventions here include the control and management of invasive alien species, habitat rehabilitation, rehydration of the morass, land use management, and development of the visitor center in the Royal Palm Reserve. We have a few shots here of the two up top were taken within the Royal Palm Reserve, and the other one is the South Negril River as you come in from the sea, which is one of the entry points to the morass. So we get to Trinidad and Tobago, which is the country I'm going to focus most upon. Here we have a project which is being executed by the Environmental Management Authority and which started in May 2018. And the project aims to reduce and reverse land degradation associated with quarry operations and former quarry sites in the northeast Trinidad area using the integrated approach. The area includes the Aripo savannas, which was declared an environmentally sensitive area. And the aim here is to restore natural vegetation, reduce sedimentation and flood risk, and restore ecological function to 40 hectares of exhausted or abandoned quarry sand and gravel pits. And restoration will result in increasing biodiversity. So the picture to the left, the map to the left shows the general area, and it shows some of the quarrying sites within that area. And to the right, you can see what the land looks like. If you were flying out of Trinidad from Piarco Airport and you looked down over this area, you would see this kind of landscape extensively. There are many challenges and impacts because of the extensive quarrying, which began during the 1940s to support various kinds of development activity in Trinidad, including construction. So we've had a history of inadequate regulation of quarry operations, poor land use practices, and resource management, and a lot of conflict among stakeholders. The impacts are many, as you can see, ranging from severe land degradation, ecosystem degradation, river sedimentation, siltation of surrounding watercourses, degradation of coastal water quality, and so on. The approaches, the integrated approach, which is promoted and being used by IWECO in this area, has many facets. Rehabilitation is one. Public and private partnership, private sector partnership, strengthening the monitoring indicator framework, capacity building, including training of community, development and dissemination of guidelines for land restoration, and knowledge sharing. The project started really in May 2018, and they started with a big launch, which included many voluntary efforts you can see to the right. The areas, well, the pilot training, the site which was chosen for the pilot is the former, well, it's on the compound of the National Quarries Company Limited, which is a state-owned and operated quarry, which would have agreed that these interventions could be done with their support. So they are the principal partner in Trinidad and Tobago. And there are three areas or three sites within this quarry. Site 1 focuses on the planting of tree species for food production, the creation of wildlife habitat and regeneration of original forest species. Site 2, which we're actually going to focus on most of all, is an extensive area of backfilled exhausted quarry pit, which is devoid of soil nutrients, or was devoid of soil nutrients, with severe gullying and erosion. And the third site is an exhausted area where forest species enrichment is being tested to determine the best species for rehabilitation of quarries. So interventions at all three sites were actually completed in July 2019, although maintenance of them continues. So focusing on site 2, the interventions here include soil nutrification using, well, mulch using waste bare hops, tree and grass cuttings, and sargassum, which would otherwise go to a landfill. The planting of vetiver grass to address soil erosion, the creation of living check dams to stem gullying and water runoff, and the creation of a plant nursery. Here we see some of the spent hops which were taken to the site for reuse, and we have a shot of the plant nursery. In these shots, we have two of the live check dams which were created to stem the erosion and gullying, and some of the vetiver which was planted. So we have three areas, remember. And site 1 focuses, well, here we can just quickly look at sites 1 and 3. So what would be the highlights of this intervention? The first one is collaboration and fostering sustainable livelihoods. There was extensive community training because one of the aims was improving community capability. So to enable replication at other additional sites, 2 NGOs, the Trust for Sustainable Livelihoods, known as SUSTRUST, and I Am Movement, in collaboration with the UNDP Small Grants Program, developed a quarry rehabilitation training program as part of the project's livelihood program. These people who were trained are referred to as quarry rehabilitation champions, and they were trained in site preparation and planting, the creation of the check dams, and all the various things that we've seen. They were trained in the use of vetiver grass as well to make a variety of products in order to provide alternative living opportunities. And they graduated in January 2020 with a big celebration and are available to work on in other interventions. Some shots or some photographs of some of the activities. You can see in the middle one that they've been able to produce quite a few products with vetiver following training, which they would have received specifically in this. Another highlight of this project are the development of guidelines for preparation of rehabilitation plans. And this is key for expansion of the effort. And really, it's one of the key aims here. So there's a public awareness campaign to increase voluntary compliance by quarry operators and monitoring of quarries by regulatory agencies. Since 2015, the EMA, the Environmental Management Authority, has actually required that there be these rehabilitation plans. And the draft guideline for the preparation of rehabilitation plans was actually completed by the EMA in December 2018 and is undergoing stakeholder review through a series of consultations. This guidebook is designed to assist applicants in submitting satisfactory rehabilitation plans for approval, required really prior to commencement of quarrying operations for which a certificate of environmental clearance has been granted by the EMA. If we think about the lessons, the results and the lessons learned, we have seen, and here we have before and after shot photos, and we have had some photos from the project team which show that there's a return of flora and fauna, slowly, but it's happening. So the first lesson learned is that land degradation can be reduced and reversed and ecological function restored. In these exhausted quarry areas, they actually found that the area that had been rehabilitated was a little bigger than they expected at 7.05 hectares. So this is one of the results or the key lesson learned. It can be done, and they are starting to see evidence of return of flora and fauna species. Second, the next lesson would be that community capacity developing component. This component has been transformative. Participants have described appreciating the value of bush, as they refer to it, of trees more, and of feeling empowered. Persons trained in rehabilitation have gained additional livelihood opportunities. These are the quarry rehabilitation champions to the left. And we have seen also that there's significant potential for replication and upscaling. Replication has actually begun because in November 2019, one of our private sector operators, the Carib Glassworks Limited, if you've ever had a beer in Trinidad and Tobago, you know Carib. They began an additional site for rehabilitation, and this is really looking very hopeful. And in addition, we are looking forward to the implementation of the guidelines for the preparation of the rehabilitation plans. This lady is referred to by her fellow quarry rehabilitation champions as Auntie Marva, because I guess she provided leadership to the champions, to the community. And we had a workshop, and this was one of the sentiments that she expressed. We thought it was quite remarkable. She said, I was one, didn't like trees. I would just burn. I would just chop. I was a hater of trees. Now I'm not like that anymore. And again, I try to impart a little bit of what I learned to anybody I meet to make the place a better place. We found that the spirit of collaboration, but also almost joy that we saw among the participants in the project when we visited the site and when they showed us the work that they had done was quite remarkable and very, very encouraging. And here we have the remark of one of the leaders in the community from this Trust for Sustainable Livelihoods, Carlton Roberts, who really provides, again, huge encouragement and inspiration and leadership to the champions, and reminds us here that We should never underestimate the power of a community. And reminds us too that ordinary people can be retooled, empowered, and that they are ready to solve the major environmental problems of deforestation. I hope that in a short time, I've given you an overview of the project, and do encourage you to take a look at the project's website, where there's much more information on all of the project interventions, and each of these countries has a country page. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Donna, for that great presentation on the IW Eco project. And it really resonated, the mother story there, you know, the creator. And, you know, this is what the work is all about, right? Getting people to see benefits to their own daily lives, you know, through the kind of work that goes on with these projects. And I think in both Donna's and Ileana's presentation, they made references time and time again to the extensive partnership network. This is not only a UNEP's undertaking, this is doing it with all of you. Many of you who have joined the call are actually active participants in many of these initiatives. So we, of course, want to thank you for all the great partnerships and all the collaboration, and we do look forward to continuing this good work. So we've been monitoring, Dion and myself been monitoring what's been going on in the chat box. We do have a few questions there. One was specifically directed to Ileana. Maybe we can start with that one. Quickly, where Jose asked regarding MPA and other data and activity in the Caribbean, corals, reef monitoring, etc. I think some maps showed important gaps in countries, particularly Cuba. So what's the strategy for, I guess, improving data sharing? So Ileana, maybe you want to take that question.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, colleague, asking from Cuba, asking this question. Currently, we are revamping CAMPAM, and also we have a new database for all the wider Caribbean region. In the past, it was 300 data. Now we have more than 1,000 plus data on the database, and this is also shared at the hub of the Caribbean Large Marine Ecosystems Program. Starting in this month, we are going to start to implement the Asia, Caribbean, and the Pacific project with contracting parties, and mainly focusing on those countries that are active and that also have proposed protected areas for protection following the criteria for the SPA protocol. So, and nevertheless, as part of this, we are going to produce several tools, guidance in terms of management effectiveness, assessments, and building interconnected MPAs using ecological criteria. So yes, basically there is an ongoing program going on. And also I take this opportunity to invite those countries that know that want to be an active country in our projects to ask your governments to keep investing in the Cartagena Convention. Thank you.
I think you're muted, Chris.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Okay. All right, let me just recap. We did have a question from Andrea, and it was in reference, I guess, to some of the material I presented in my presentation. How do we address trade, harvest, and consumption of wildlife that is ecologically sustainable, but potentially dangerous in the context of pandemics? Do we have the right instruments in place already? So I suppose in the Caribbean, of course, when we look at the region and the wider region, we are looking significantly, I suppose, at, say Guyana, maybe Belize, perhaps others. But, the wildlife trade is something that we had been discussing internally in UNEP in terms of how it impacts communities and societies, and is very context related, very location specific. What we have seen generally, of course, with respect to most countries is that biosecurity and biosafety is something that is an evolving area. And that spans the range of, animal health and public health as well. And UNEP has been collaborating with FAO and IOE, I think it is, the specialist agency that deals with animal health on some of those matters. So I think the general notion is that we are not quite there. The Caribbean region is still quite exposed with respect to some of this. But as I was also indicating, I don't think we know very much. For example, where, we are consuming wild meat like laba in Guyana, for example, or tattoo in Grenada. I think it's tattoo, right? In Grenada, or even as we understood, there is some level of harvesting of monkey in St. Kitts, what I understood, which I hadn't known. And there may be other examples elsewhere. So these things are still under investigation. I guess with some of the collaborations with some of our partners, we could start exploring some of those things, but we'd welcome inputs and further thoughts through our sub-regional office, through Vincent's shop as well, and share your thoughts. And we can probably provide information and connect people to folks who've been working on this kind of stuff. But certainly in the area of biosafety and biosecurity is something that we've been working on already, and we can probably update in the future as we proceed. Let's see. We had a couple comments asking from Shamoy and Christine, specifically about participation. In this case, the BVI. Can BVI be part of future biodiversity studies? And Christine was asking about how countries can become part of the IWECO project. Well, let me let Ileana and Donna chime in on those two questions.
I believe that this is more IWECO, and also Jan has posted some answers, but probably Donna Sue wants to complement.
The IWECO project is well underway, and what Jan reminds us in his response in the chat is that we are happy to discuss or to provide, to share our experience, which we're still gathering, of course, with interested countries and parties, because the important thing is of course promotion of the integrated approach, not seeing one thing in isolation, but dealing with all the linkages. And of course, it's a project which is well established and being implemented within 10 specific countries. But we would be happy to share experience in terms of what we're learning and in terms of the approach. I dare say that Christopher Cox could also provide some guidance to countries that might be interested in a similar project, because he is one of the project authors. So I'm actually handing back to you, Chris. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Donna. Yes, indeed, we have a network of specialists within UNEP that could help countries build up capacity through projects and initiatives. One thing that I would note, however, with, for example, the IWECO project is funded under the Global Environment Facility. So for the UCOTS, the overseas territories, we've been able to find other creative means to bring in other partners that are not eligible for funding under the GEF. Okay, so having joint activities where, for example, we could have these other territories join in, maybe joint activities and so on. So that's something that we try to seek out opportunities and partnerships, for example, with the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States Secretariat that has some linkages there. Okay, so we can see how we can explore some of those links to expand cooperation. Chris Corbin was asking the question, there are more efforts to do ecosystems-based approaches, integrating pollution interventions and habitat restoration. So any comments by the panel on such an approach? Again, Donna has raised some of this in her presentation. Ileana may have some thoughts as well. And I'm also monitoring the time, and we've had some people drop off. So maybe if we could just have maybe a reflection on Chris's comments on adapting EBM approaches and some of what the work they're doing in these projects. Ileana and Donna, if you can just share maybe your reactions.
Yeah, very shortly, I firmly believe in the integrated approaches, and this is one of the main ways of doing intersectoral coordination, as well as really tackling the problems, because you cannot work in isolation, just pollution or biodiversity or fishes and no livelihoods, for example. So the EBM approach, among others, and the blue approaches that are coming, the blue economy, there are very good tools to guide how to work using the ecosystemic approach, and this is how we should go about it. Thanks.
Donna, you may have anything to add, perhaps?
I would add that I agree with everything that that Ileana said and the points that we've made. The integrated approach is important, but I think it's also very essential that we are able to expand the discussion and the thinking beyond ourselves. So we can't keep preaching to the converted, and I think hence the value and the importance of the communication and trying really to reach out to as many different people and different communities and sectors as possible on this issue. If we are going to have change take place at the scale that it is needed. And I think what particularly is heartening for us in the IW Eco project is, yes, there's a huge amount of partnership and collaboration between private and public sector, but when you actually see people on the ground benefit and learn how to do things differently, and also bring their own personal experiences, which are often traditional, to the table, it's encouraging and creates a lot of hope in us. But communicate. And again, I always end up pointing people to the website, which has a lot more information than I certainly could have gone into in a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna, for that, and Ileana for the reflections. In fact, yeah, our job has a lot to do with communications. It's again going back to Marva, whatever we're doing, trying to get the Marvas of the world, involved and active, and so on. So I think we're definitely coming down to what is almost a 2-hour webinar. It went along a little bit longer than we thought. I'm going to hand over to Vincent in. Okay, maybe I see one comment popping up here in terms of the current success with implementation of the Cartagena Convention and the impact of the present crisis. I don't know if maybe Vincent or Ileana, maybe you could just take that very, very quickly, and then I'll just say a few wrap up and then hand it over to Vincent. It seems like a very interesting question. I wouldn't want to cut it. So just this last one, Ileana, if you come in, and then okay, I'm hearing silence. Okay,
Chris, I'll jump in. This is Vincent Sweeney.
okay.
I'm not sure if Ileana is still on, but in terms of a general response to Dr. Jessamy's query, I think there's been mixed responses in terms of recognizing that our future, in terms of responding to COVID and being prepared and trying to avoid future epidemics of zoonotic origin. I think there's mixed reactions. In circles, I think there's a lot of recognition that we need to do things better. But even among other UN colleagues, I have to say, there's a very slow recognition of the relevance of the environment and biodiversity in this COVID crisis, and therefore we have a lot of work to do, I think, in shaping the narrative. Maybe not for the health response, but certainly in terms of.
Sorry, can I speak quickly because I was muted when I was speaking? Thank you for the question, and I wish to say that the convention has two aspects. One is the financial, and the other one is the programmatic. From the programmatic point of view, we are very blessed with a humongous amount of donors, partners, from the programmatic point of view. The challenge that we are experiencing, this is not from now, this is not COVID challenge, is that many countries, for some political reasons or some internal challenges, have not been making their contributions while others have been doing their contributions, and that poses a challenge. That's what I am thinking, that political will from governments and decision makers is very important, because this is the success depends on how we all work together. And it's not just to ask for us to deliver if there are not the commitments, voluntary commitments made by countries being available. But yes, programmatically, I believe that we are just delivering our mandate, and we are a very successful, rich, wealthy, big and humongous, growing and run regional active network, and also delivering our mandate. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Iliana. And I'll just leave. Yeah, Vincent was wrapping up. I'll just hand back to Vincent, and then I'll just do the final wrap up.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I actually wanted to speak after you because I wanted to thank you for your moderation. But since you've given me the floor again, I'll use it to not only thank you, but thank all the other presenters and those that contributed to the presentations, and also particularly the participants. We still have approximately 70 participants, even though we've gone an hour and a half. So I think that's an indication of how interesting your presentations were. And I think we definitely have to consider whether we want to extend the webinar to an hour and a half, because we seem to have interest and we certainly have material that we can share with others. So thanks to you all as the resource persons, and also to the participants. And I'll hand back to you for the final word. Thanks. Over.
Thank you, Vincent. And let me, on behalf of the entire team, of course, and the presenters, thank you again for this webinar. I thought it's a very good initiative on behalf of the sub-regional office. And as I think is going to be the plan, is going to be a regular fixture. So again, let me thank you all for joining. At one time, I think we had in excess of 100 participants who joined. And indeed, I'd like to say that the discussion was quite rich. There was questions in the chat that were asking whether the presentations will be available for download. They will be, from what I'm seeing from our colleagues. And again, Ian Bedlam, who is the project coordinator for the Jeff Idaho Eco project, who's working along with Donna, has extended a hand. You can reach out to him. He's provided his email as well. And you can get in contact with any one of us through Vincent if you need to, or share further ideas. And let's keep the partnership building. UNEP is, of course, very excited about moving forward in this environment and continuing to collaborate with all of you out there. Again, thank you for the opportunity, Vincent, for giving me the chance to present and moderate. So thank you. Have a safe day, safe week, and safe few weeks going forward. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you. See you again soon.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.